up? Hello. Today's review is of a really interesting nonfiction book that I found at the library using the Dewey Decimal System. So I feel pretty accomplished about that. I read it in the 11th grade when I was taking AP Biology and recently decided that it was time for me to revisit it because I couldn't quite remember why I loved it so much. That book is The Secret Life of Lobsters by Trevor Corson. So this is just a small picture of the lobstering town, or village rather, on Little Cranberry Island, which is off of Mount Desert Island, probably best known in the American Northeast as Bar Harbor, and it is off the coast of Maine, which is way up there, up by Canada, for those of you who are not familiar with New England and the North American landscape. And it's this tiny little island where lobstering is definitely a way of life, and these people rely on catching lobsters and bringing them in and selling them. And when scientists come to town and institute a bunch of new conservation laws, people tend to get a little bit nervous because they are not quite sure how that's going to impact them economically. If they have to catch fewer lobsters, that's not as much revenue coming in for them, and so their lives may start to become a little more impoverished, and they might suffer, despite the fact that we want to continue to sustain the lobster population for as long as possible for ecological and ocean health reasons. This book is really fascinating because Trevor Corson, who is a journalist, tells it in the form of a narrative. We watch from the beginning as we introduce the main human players in the book, the lobstermen who are going to be prevalent throughout the story, the scientists who are going to be prevalent throughout the story. He starts in the here and now, almost, in 2001, which was the here and now when this was published, and what those lobstermen are up to, where they're still fishing, how they're still fishing, if they're still fishing, and their relationships at that time with the scientists who are trying to preserve the lobster population. And we move from that first chapter of Here and Now back in time to how this whole sort of mess began, because in the late 70s and mid 80s there was a real feud between the lobstermen and the scientific community in this one particular area, because the lobsters that they were catching were really small, and there was a lot of controversy about whether that minimum size needed to increase and which lobsters were being thrown back, and were enough lobsters being thrown back, and were the female lobsters been given the chance to lay more eggs and continue to try and repopulate, and were the lobstermen really being honest in their count of how many they threw back and how many kept. So that debate rattled on and on and on. And the other part of this story is a lot about lobsters on a very scientific level, how they mate, how they reproduce, and how they themselves are quick with their turnaround of replenishing their species, which is obviously a key ingredient in the whole ocean health piece and the economics of lobstering, period. If there aren't enough lobsters to continue making more lobsters, how will they continue to catch and fish them? So the whole symbiosis in this relationship at its three prongs of the scientists, the lobstermen, and the lobsters themselves is really intricate, and it's just so well explained by Trevor Corson. When I picked this up at the library, the librarian said, "Oh, we don't really see many people check this one out." And I said, "Yeah, I read it before, it's really good." And she goes, "I've actually heard that even though this is kind of a very specific, unique scientific nonfiction book, that it reads very much like a novel, and it's actually really good." And I said, "Yeah, it is. That's exactly what it does. It really does read like a novel." Trevor Corson takes you from present day all the way back and all the way through. In each chapter it kind of switches off between here's what's going on in the scientist and lobsterman debate, and then here's what's going on with all of these lobster researchers testing out different things in labs and pairing different lobsters together and really looking in a very humane way, really looking at how they act and behave and reproduce and what kind of habitats that they most need to live in to continue to repopulate, so that they can go back and inform the rest of the scientific community and say, hey, these lobsters are tending to live in these kind of climates, and this is how fast they can replenish their species. maybe you should put a ban on where lobstermen can fish. This book teaches you a lot, not only about what scientific process is like for something as unique as lobsters, but also the life of a fisherman. If you've read The Perfect Storm by Sebastian Junger, if you've read any Linda Greenlaw, you sort of know about this community already, or at least a community similar to this. But small fishing communities have their own story to tell, and this does a really good job of bringing that to the forefront and portraying the lobstermen in a way that shows them as people who need to sustain their way of life and have worked very hard to sustain the history within their own families of lobstering for generations and generations, but also portrays them as conservationists and people who aren't just out there for their own gain and aren't out there to make higher than market price off of their lobsters, selling them on the docks, but are actually looking to continue to watch the populations of lobsters grow so that they can continue their own trade, but also because they realize that this is a resource and that they need to be kind to that resource in order for it to thrive. You really do see everything in this book, from the way that lobsters are caught, to the way that lobsters are sold, to the way that lobsters are researched, to the way that all of these people interact with each other, and it eventually does come to a conclusion, much like a novel would, about what the scientists surrounding this particular community's issue wound up doing and how everybody works out in the end, happy or not. You'll have to read the book. It does take a little bit of time to read because it's almost 300 pages, and there is some jargon that you have to continue to stumble across. Definitely very journalistic in style. Guess I'm on a roll with rereading things from my high school days. I give this book 5 out of 5 stars. It is a fantastic read if you like nonfiction. If you by any chance have already read this, please let me know down in the comments. I would love to talk about it some more, and conversely, if you have not read this, I would also love to talk about it with you and tell you how interesting it is. Also, if you're a Mainer, let me know how you feel about lobsters, because I know that there are a lot of people from Maine who refuse to eat them. It's very strange, but also very true. I hope you're having lovely weeks and lovely lives. Anything that you might want to know is down below. Thanks so much, as always, for watching, and we'll see you soon.